The unthinkable acts of ordinary people, what compels ordinary people to commit unspeakable acts of cruelty. How does an entire society spiral into cycles of division, hatred, and violence? These questions are not abstract. They are questions that have echoed through history, repeated across different societies, and continue to be relevant today. The terrifying reality is that given the right conditions, even the most average individuals can become perpetrators of horrific acts of violence or oppression. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is a slow, often imperceptible process that occurs over time, and it can affect anyone, regardless of their background, morals, or beliefs. History has provided us with numerous examples of how ordinary people, living within what seem to be normal societies, could engage in the most inhumane behavior. One of the most chilling examples of this phenomenon is the 1994 Rwandan genocide. In just 100 days, nearly 800,000 people were murdered. The most terrifying aspect of this genocide is not just the scale of the violence, but who the perpetrators were. These were not foreign invaders or faceless armies. The people carrying out the killings were the victims' own neighbors, co-workers, and even friends. People who had known each other for years, who had lived side by side in the same communities, suddenly turned on one another. What drives such a drastic and violent change in human behavior? The answer lies in the power of propaganda. Propaganda is a tool of psychological manipulation, and it plays a significant role in dehumanizing the victims. It presents them as something less than human, often as vermin, parasites, or enemies of the state. In Rwanda, the Tutsi population was portrayed as a threat to the very existence of the Hutu majority. By stripping the victims of their humanity, propaganda made it possible for ordinary individuals to rationalize their involvement in the killings. They no longer saw their victims as people, but as subhuman creatures that needed to be eradicated. This enabled them to commit atrocities without the usual feelings of guilt or remorse. This process did not occur in isolation. It was the result of years of deliberate conditioning. For decades, leaders in Rwanda had been using divisive language to create an us versus them mentality. Over time, this language seeped into the everyday lives of the people, gradually shaping the way they saw one another. The transformation of people into enemies is not an instantaneous event. It is a process that occurs through subtle shifts in attitudes, reinforced by the media, by political leaders, and by social groups. This kind of psychological conditioning is not limited to specific countries or times in history. It is something that can happen anywhere, under the right conditions. Psychological experiments also shed light on how easily people can be manipulated into committing cruel acts. One such experiment is the Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in 1971. In this experiment, ordinary individuals were assigned the roles of prison guards and prisoners. Within just a few days, those assigned to the role of guards began to exhibit abusive and violent behavior toward the prisoners, even though there was no direct authority compelling them to do so. The experiment revealed a disturbing truth. People do not need to be inherently cruel to become perpetrators of cruelty. All it takes is the right environment, the right conditions, and the right psychological mechanisms at play. The Stanford Prison Experiment highlights a critical point. The capacity for cruelty lies within all of us, just beneath the surface, waiting to be triggered. It demonstrates that under the right circumstances, even the most average person can become complicit in violence and oppression. This is a dangerous truth that we must face, because it is not limited to psychological experiments or historical atrocities. It is something that happens in our society today, in ways both overt and subtle. The forces that lead to dehumanization and violence are still at work in the modern world. In fact, they are perhaps even more powerful today due to the influence of social media and modern communication technologies. These tools can amplify propaganda, creating echo chambers of hatred and division. In the past, it was more difficult to spread divisive rhetoric to large audiences. Today, however, social media platforms allow hateful narratives to spread like wildfire, reaching millions of people in an instant. On these platforms, people are often exposed to content that reinforces negative stuff, creating a distorted view of the other. This tribalistic thinking, which treats opponents as existential threats, can easily escalate into online harassment, doxing, and cancel culture. Once individuals or groups are labeled as enemies, empathy quickly fades, and cruelty becomes justifiable in the eyes of those who seek to silence or punish them. The us versus them mentality takes hold, and people stop seeing others as fellow human beings, instead viewing them as mere obstacles to be eliminated. This descent into dehumanization does not happen all at once. It begins with small, seemingly harmless changes in the way we talk about and treat others. It starts when we casually dismiss entire groups as inferior, problematic, or dangerous. These attitudes are reinforced by media, political leaders, and social circles that perpetuate divisive language. Over time, these attitudes evolve into something far more dangerous, and the cycle of dehumanization begins to take hold. Group identity and peer pressure. As we continue to explore why ordinary individuals can engage in such unspeakable acts of cruelty, it is important to recognize that the transformation from peaceful citizen to active participant in violence doesn't occur solely due to external influences like propaganda. There are also deep-rooted psychological and social factors at play, making the potential for cruelty a fundamental part of the human psyche. These factors can be triggered by specific social, political, and cultural conditions, amplifying humanity's capacity for harm. One significant factor is the power of group identity. Human beings are inherently social creatures, and our behavior is often influenced by the groups we belong to, whether based on nationality, religion, political affiliation, or other collective identities. The desire to belong and be accepted by a group can lead individuals to abandon their personal moral compass in favor of groupthink. Group identity can reinforce harmful stereotypes and create a sense of us versus them, where members of the outgroup are seen as inferior, dangerous, or less deserving of empathy. When people are emotionally attached to their group, they are more likely to justify harmful actions toward those perceived as outsiders. This loyalty can make individuals overlook or rationalize unethical behavior, especially when the actions are framed as protecting the group from an imagined or real threat. The intensity of group identity can escalate dehumanization, making it easier to justify cruelty. Peer pressure also plays a crucial role. People are highly influenced by the behaviors and attitudes of those around them, especially in environments where conformity is valued. In times of political instability or war, individuals may feel compelled to follow the behavior of their peers, even when it contradicts their own morals. Peer pressure creates a social norm that encourages violence, and individuals who might otherwise resist may become complicit due to the fear of being ostracized or excluded. These dynamics are often seen in wartime, where soldiers or citizens commit atrocities, not because they are inherently violent, but because they are part of a system that normalizes brutality. Peer pressure can create a social norm that justifies cruelty, and individuals may act in ways that they would otherwise find morally unacceptable. Moral disengagement. Another key psychological process is moral disengagement, which allows individuals to justify unethical behavior. Through euphemistic labeling, people can reframe harmful actions as neutral or even positive. Killing is not seen as murder but as eliminating the enemy or carrying out orders. This allows people to distance themselves from their actions, making it easier for them to commit acts of cruelty without feeling guilt. Moral disengagement can also take the form of displacement of responsibility, where individuals place the blame on others, such as authority figures or the state. This process enables individuals to absolve themselves of guilt, believing that they are not personally responsible for the harm they cause. By understanding these psychological factors, group identity, peer pressure, and moral disengagement, we gain insight into how ordinary people can become complicit in cruelty. These dynamics don't just exist in extreme events like genocide or war. They can manifest in everyday interactions, in how we treat others, and how we perceive the other. The dangerous psychological dynamics at play. The descent into cruelty does not happen overnight. It is a gradual process that begins with seemingly harmless actions and beliefs. This transformation is not inevitable. Many people resist the forces that lead to dehumanization, but understanding the psychological dynamics that facilitate this process is critical in preventing history from repeating itself. One of the most significant psychological mechanisms at play is cognitive dissonance. This term refers to the discomfort people feel when their actions contradict their beliefs or values. The human mind seeks to resolve this discomfort by changing beliefs or justifying actions to maintain a positive. In the context of cruelty, cognitive dissonance helps people justify harmful actions, such as violence or oppression, by convincing themselves that what they are doing is justified or necessary. Consider a soldier asked to carry out atrocities against civilians. If this soldier believes in the inherent goodness of humanity, they may experience significant cognitive dissonance when ordered to harm innocent people. To resolve this conflict, the soldier may convince themselves that the civilians are enemies or that the greater good justifies their actions. This allows individuals to compartmentalize their behavior and rationalize cruelty. Even if they would normally reject such actions, cognitive dissonance can also manifest in the justification of oppressive systems. When an individual benefits from a system of inequality, whether based on race, class, or gender, convincing themselves that it is necessary or that those who suffer under it are somehow deserving. This mental shortcut allows people to continue supporting harmful systems without feeling guilty or conflicted. Self-justification is another powerful psychological force that helps people rationalize their behavior. When people engage in unethical behavior, they are often faced with the uncomfortable reality that they have violated their own moral code. Rather than admitting wrongdoing, people often engage in self-justification, reinterpreting their actions in a way that allows them to maintain their moral integrity. For example, a person who has discriminated against another individual might justify their actions by believing that the person deserved it, or that they were simply following societal norms. This self-justification prevents the individual from confronting the real harm they have caused, and allows them to continue their behavior without guilt. Over time, this cycle of self-justification erodes an individual's moral compass, making it easier to participate in increasingly harmful actions. One of the most insidious aspects of self-justification is that it can be used to defend violence for a perceived higher cause. Throughout history, many of the worst atrocities were carried out in the name of ideology, religion, or political belief. When people believe that their cause is morally superior, they stop questioning the morality of their actions. This belief in moral superiority allows individuals to justify extreme acts of violence as necessary for the greater good. The ability to justify harm in the name of a higher purpose has been a defining feature of many totalitarian regimes, religious wars, and ideological movements. Take, for example, the leaders and followers of extremist ideologies. They often believe that their cause is so important that any means are justified, even if those means involve violence and cruelty. This mindset leads to the dehumanization of the enemy, allowing individuals to view them as obstacles that must be eliminated for the greater good. In this way, self-justification and moral superiority can create a justification for cruelty and lead to the breakdown of ethical standards. At the heart of this process is the concept of moral disengagement. This is the psychological mechanism by which individuals convince themselves that their actions are not morally wrong, even when they clearly violate ethical standards. Moral disengagement allows people to commit harmful acts without feeling guilty, and it plays a central role in the escalation of cruelty. There are several ways in which moral disengagement manifests. One common form of moral disengagement is euphemistic labeling. This involves reframing harmful actions in neutral or positive terms. For example, war crimes may be referred to as collateral damage, or the act of killing may be described as eliminating threats. By using euphemisms, individuals distance themselves from the reality of their actions and diminish the emotional impact of what they are doing. Another form of moral disengagement is displacement of responsibility. In this case, individuals shift the blame for their actions onto external forces or authority figures. Soldiers who commit atrocities during wartime may claim that they were simply following orders and were not responsible for their actions. Similarly, individuals who support oppressive systems may claim that they are just following societal norms and cannot be held accountable for the harm caused by those norms. Dehumanization is the final, most extreme stage of moral disengagement. It occurs when individuals or groups are stripped of their humanity and seen as less than human. Dehumanization is often the precursor to extreme violence, as it makes it easier for people to justify harming others. Throughout history, dehumanization has been used as a tool to justify genocide, slavery, and war. In Rwanda, the Tutsi population was referred to as cockroaches by the media, making it easier for perpetrators to kill them without remorse. The process of dehumanization is often gradual, starting with small changes in language and attitudes. Initially, people may begin to see the other as different or inferior, but over time, these differences are amplified until the other is no longer seen as human. Once this occurs, the ethical barriers to violence begin to crumble, and cruelty becomes easier to justify. The final piece of the puzzle is the bystander effect. This phenomenon occurs when individuals witness harmful behavior but fail to intervene. The bystander effect is driven by the diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present, individuals are less likely to act because they assume that someone else will intervene. This creates an environment in which harmful actions go unchecked, and cruelty becomes normalized. Throughout history, many atrocities were allowed to continue because of bystanders who failed to speak out or take action. Social influence, conformity, and groupthink while the psychological mechanisms discussed thus far, such as cognitive dissonance, self-justification, moral disengagement, and dehumanization, play a significant role in justifying harmful actions. It is crucial to understand that these factors often operate within a broader social and cultural context. The dynamics of social influence, conformity, and groupthink can contribute to amplifying individual actions into collective behavior. These psychological forces can drive entire societies toward dangerous paths, enabling the normalization of cruelty and violence. Social influence refers to the ways in which individuals adjust their behaviors, beliefs, or attitudes to align with those of others. One of the most well-documented forms of social influence is conformity, a tendency to adjust one's actions or opinions to match those of a group, especially in the face of peer pressure or a desire to belong. Conformity can occur even when individuals know that the actions of the group are morally questionable. A powerful example of conformity is seen in the Milgram experiment. Conducted in the 1960s, participants were asked to administer electric shocks to a person whenever they answered questions incorrectly. Despite the apparent suffering of the person receiving the shocks, many participants continued to administer higher levels of voltage when instructed by an authority figure. The results of this experiment showed how ordinary individuals can be compelled to engage in harmful behavior under the influence of perceived authority and group dynamics. How to resist and fight against dehumanization. The key to resisting the forces that lead to cruelty and dehumanization is the first step in breaking the cycle is to acknowledge that no one is immune from the psychological mechanisms that allow cruelty to take root. It is easy to believe that we are immune from these forces, that we would never participate in harmful actions. But the truth is, the capacity for cruelty exists in all of us. We must constantly remind ourselves that we are vulnerable to the same psychological dynamics that lead others to commit atrocities. The most dangerous belief is the assumption that we are somehow exempt from these forces. The moment we think, "I would never do something like that," we are already at risk. This mindset can blind us to the subtle ways in which we might contribute to cycles of even if we are not actively committing violence. It is crucial that we resist complacency and remain vigilant, constantly questioning our own biases, assumptions, and motivations. Radical self-awareness requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own behavior and beliefs. It is easy to rationalize small acts of cruelty or prejudice, thinking that they don't matter in the grand scheme of things. However, these small actions, when accumulated, can contribute to the larger societal forces that perpetuate division and hatred. By developing the courage to confront our own biases and question our actions, we can prevent ourselves from becoming complicit in the dehumanization of others. Once we have developed this self-awareness, the next step is to take personal responsibility. We must ask ourselves, am I making excuses for behavior I would condemn in others? Am I blindly following authority without questioning its morality? Am I labeling an entire group as the enemy? These questions force us to reflect on our actions and our role in the social dynamics that perpetuate cruelty. It is easy to fall into the trap of moral licensing, where we justify our own harmful actions by believing we are still good people. But confronting these questions forces us to reckon with our true moral responsibility. Empathy is one of the most powerful tools we have to resist dehumanization. It is easy to forget that behind every label, whether it's enemy, other, or undeserving, there is a human being with their own experiences, fears, and hopes. The moment we begin to view others as individuals rather than as members of a group, we challenge the mental shortcuts that lead to prejudice and hatred. This doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone or accept every perspective, but it does mean recognizing the humanity of others and engaging with them in good faith. One of the key strategies to combat dehumanization is to view people as individuals rather than as members of a homogeneous group. Stereotyping is one of the most common ways we dehumanize others. When we label an entire group as dangerous, inferior, or evil, we lose sight of the unique individuals within that group. This mindset strips people of their humanity, turning them into abstractions that can be more easily victimized or marginalized. Instead of focusing on the group as a whole, we must make an effort to see each person as an individual, with their own story, values, and identity. This is not to say that we should ignore the structural inequalities or social dynamics that exist between groups. Rather, it is to remind us that every individual is more than the labels society places on them. Meaningful dialogue and engagement with individuals from different backgrounds can help break down the barriers of division that are often reinforced by prejudice and fear. When we engage with people on a personal level, we humanize them, making it much harder to justify cruelty or violence. Another crucial strategy is to question the narratives that we are exposed to, especially those propagated by media, political leaders, and social groups. In many cases, these narratives are designed to create division and fear, to label certain groups as the enemy and to foster a sense of us versus them. We must become critical consumers of information, always asking, who benefits from this narrative? Who profits from our anger, fear, or division? By questioning these narratives, we regain control over our perceptions and prevent ourselves from being manipulated by the forces of division. It is important to recognize that propaganda is one of the most powerful tools used to manipulate public perception. Whether it comes from politicians, media outlets, or social groups, propaganda is designed to stir up emotions, often by portraying certain groups as threats or enemies. The power of propaganda lies in its ability to bypass critical thinking and tap into our emotions, particularly fear, anger, and hatred. When we allow ourselves to be swept up in these emotions, we stop thinking rationally, and cruelty becomes easier to justify. Radical self-awareness is not a one-time practice, but a continuous effort. We must make it a habit to question our own beliefs, actions, and biases, and to engage in ongoing reflection. This means being open to learning and growing, even when it is uncomfortable or challenging. It means being willing to change our minds when presented with new information or perspectives. It also means being willing to take action when we see injustice, even if that action is small. Every act of resistance, no matter how seemingly insignificant, is a step toward breaking the cycle of dehumanization. Moral courage is essential in this process. It takes courage to speak out against cruelty, to stand up for those who are marginalized or oppressed, and to challenge the systems that perpetuate injustice. Moral courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. In times of crisis or uncertainty, it is easy to fall into passivity or silence, but we must resist this temptation. The most dangerous moments in history did not occur because of the actions of a few evil individuals. They happened because of the silence of those who allowed injustice to persist. Standing up against dehumanization requires us to act when it matters most. This might mean speaking out against hate speech in our communities, confronting harmful stereotypes in our social circles, or challenging political leaders who incite division and fear. It might also mean educating others about the dangers of dehumanization and the importance of empathy and understanding. By taking action in our everyday lives, we can create a ripple effect that spreads to others, encouraging them to resist the forces of cruelty and division. Finally, education is one of the most powerful tools we have to combat Studies in social psychology have shown that exposure to diverse perspectives can reduce prejudice and increase empathy. This highlights the importance of fostering open, critical discussions in our communities, schools, and workplaces. When we engage with people who hold different beliefs, we expand our understanding of the world and break down the mental barriers that divide us. Education helps us recognize the humanity in others and reduces the influence of propaganda that seeks to divide us. In addition to building supportive communities, it is important to create safe spaces for people to express their experiences and emotions. Dehumanization often arises from a lack of understanding or empathy, and these gaps are often filled by fear, misinformation, and stereotypes. By providing safe spaces for marginalized individuals to share their stories and for others to listen with an open heart, we create opportunities for emotional healing and growth. These spaces also serve as crucial sites for collective action, where people can come together to plan and organize for social change. Finally, one of the most important aspects of resisting dehumanization is maintaining hope and resilience. The fight against cruelty, injustice, and oppression is long and difficult, and it can often feel overwhelming. However, it is essential to remember that change is possible, and that even the smallest actions can have a significant impact. By staying grounded in our values and continuing to act with compassion and courage, we contribute to a broader movement for social justice and equality. In moments of despair, it is important to remember that history has shown us that change is possible. From the civil rights movement to the fight against apartheid, people have come together in solidarity to resist oppression and These movements were not without their struggles, but they ultimately led to profound social and political changes. The fight for justice may be difficult, but it is always worth it. The more people who choose to stand up for what is right, the stronger the collective voice becomes.